Welcome back, everyone. This is the Oracle Decodes, the Kabbalah Tree of Life, the Magician, and the Statue of Liberty. We're going to start out taking a look at the diagram of the Tree of Life. It's most commonly associated with a form of Jewish mysticism called Kabbalah. And most people, I'm going to guess here, if they've heard of Kabbalah at all, it's probably through a Hollywood superstar like Madonna, which there's a lot of irony there in itself. But beyond that, my guess is that not many people have spent a great deal of time looking into the Kabbalah at all. But if you ever have, you'll already know that you can find a great deal of information out there about it. Much more than what we're going to talk briefly about here in this video piece. But the brief info that we are going to take a look at here is really all we need for what we're doing, which is decoding this particular symbol called the Tree of Life in Kabbalah. So we're going to start out at Wikipedia again, and the reason I do this is just so that you can get the mainstream story in a nutshell, in this case about the Tree of Life. And we're going to highlight just a few things from what you can find in these few paragraphs there on Wikipedia talking about the Tree of Life diagram. So you can find it says, used in various mystical traditions, including not only Jewish mysticism, but also Christian Kabbalah, Hermetic Kabbalah, and Theosophy. And it says that some scholars trace the origins of the Tree of Life back to Assyria in the 9th century BC. In Jewish mysticism, this traces back to around the 1500s, so the medieval times. But in Jewish mysticism, this diagram that you can see here, you can count 10 circles. And particularly when you're studying Jewish Kabbalah, the circles with the Hebrew letters in them are called Sephirot. Now, traditionally, there are 10 Sephirot that are taught within this system, representing the 10 personality aspects or faces of God, if you will. And then also in how those same 10 personality aspects or faces are found to be within us, within man. Now there's also an 11th hidden Sephirot called Da'at, that if it's taught is found in that empty space in this diagram that you can see doesn't have a circle. Now starting at the top triangle, the Sephirot are named the crown, understanding, and wisdom. The middle triangle is on the left side mercy, on the right side severity, and beauty in the middle. The bottom triangle is on the left side victory, the right side glory, and foundation in the middle. And the bottom Sephirot is called kingdom. And finally, the last brief piece of information we're going to put in here is that the 3 pillars of the Tree of Life are known as the left hand pillar of mercy, the right hand pillar of severity, and the middle path of balance. So with just those brief pieces of information and look at the Tree of Life, let's take a look starting out with a screenshot from Stellarium. Once again, a free online program you can use to verify everything I'm going to show you here for yourself. So we've queued it up to look at the sky story from the Northern Hemisphere viewer's perspective once again. And remember that what I've been calling the real oracle, the real all-seeing eye, or the real secret decoder ring, can be found that very special place in the sky by facing due south. And that green line running vertically down the image helps you locate the north-south meridian line, and when you pay attention facing due south to everything that's rising in the east and setting in the west along that red arc of the ecliptic there in the middle of the image, along that arc is where you're going to find all of the known zodiac constellations, the sun, the moon, and all the known planets traveling along. Now, where the north-south meridian line facing south, right, crosses the arc of the ecliptic, that's where the viewer is going to be watching all the action in the sky story through. and that's how you find the real oracle. So we've queued it up for 12 days before what is commonly celebrated by practicing Christians as Christmas to the date commonly called December 14th of 2020 at midnight. This is where the 12 days of Christmas comes from. And this is also a time of year in the Northern Hemisphere that is also 7 days from the winter solstice. And notice what is by now our old friend that we keep running into, Orion, lined up right in the middle of that very special crossing point of the north-south meridian line and the arc of the ecliptic. Also, take note of the constellation of Auriga, right above Orion's head, also lined up at that very special crossing point. Now, as we talked about in previous pieces, the constellation of Auriga is known as the Chariot these days, but when you're looking at how Auriga appears in the sky, how it's shaped, especially when it appears in alignment this time of year at the top of the all-seeing eye and on top of Orion's head, right there at the crown, when you're looking at it, things are going to start to come together a little bit easier. So I just wanted to show you this view before we zoom in and get an even closer look at the constellation of Orion lined up right in the middle of the cross of the north-south meridian line in the ecliptic. And then let's lay that next to an image of the Tree of Life diagram and take a closer look now that we've got them both together. Now, as we see, the Tree of Life is actually encoding the constellation of Orion. In the alignment 7 days before the winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere, right on the middle of the cross of the north-south meridian line and the arc of the ecliptic. So taking a look as we're making these correspondences, the top triangle portion of the Tree of Life corresponds to the top triangle of the stars of the constellation of Orion. So if you start over there on the left with Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse and Bellatrix over on the right and include Orion's head stars, that can be your top triangle. But remember, the constellation Auriga is up there too, above Orion's head, shaped just like a crown. So that could also connect with the top Sephiroth, which, by the way, is named the crown as well. So the middle triangle of the Tree of Life, then, you can see corresponds with the 3 belt stars of Orion in the middle of the constellation, also known as the 3 kings. So on the left side, the first belt star is Alnitak, which is derived from Arabic and means the girdle. The middle star, Alnilam, also in Arabic, means string of pearls. And then Mintaka is the third belt star, meaning belt. The next 2 Sephiroth on the Tree of Life correspond to the 2 feet stars of Orion. The first on the left side, Saif, in Arabic meaning sword of the giant. We'll get to that in a minute. And on the left side, Rigel, in Arabic meaning the left leg of the giant. Now that leaves the bottom 2 Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, which correspond to the upper sword and the lower sword stars in the constellation of Orion. Now this is quite a special place within this constellation, according at least to the information we're given about it by mainstream astronomy, because within this Sword of Orion area, also known as the Lost Jewels of Orion, you'll also find the famous Orion Nebula, said to be a stellar nursery, or in other words, the Orion Nebula are where new stars are born. So now some things are starting to make even more sense when looking at things through this lens. When you look at where Orion's sword area is in the constellation, you can also see that that same area and shape could also be interpreted as Orion's phallus, let's say, especially when putting together that the Orion Nebula located there is where new stars are born. Now, in the Tree of Life diagram, though, this area corresponds with the bottom two Sephiroth, named Foundation and Kingdom. And even the names of the Sephiroth and how they appear here on the Tree of Life diagram, it's also easy to make the association there with a phallus as well, right? Now, connecting it overall, of course, let's not forget, it's called the Tree of Life. The three paths now let's easily decode when you look at the constellation of Orion lined up in the middle of the north-south meridian line at midnight in the northern hemisphere, 1 week prior to the winter solstice. The left-hand path of the Tree of Life corresponds to the left side of the constellation of Orion. So you can start at either the head stars of the constellation of Orion, or, like we've mentioned before, also it might be corresponding to the constellation of Auriga, above Orion's head, shaped like a crown. So starting at the top and moving down the left side of the constellation of Orion, the next star you meet is Betelgeuse, or Betelgeuse. Moving down to the belt star Alnitak, and then down to Orion's foot, Saiph. The right-hand path of the Tree of Life corresponds to the right side of the constellation of Orion's body. So again, starting at the crown, moving down this time to Bellatrix, then to the belt star Mentaka, and all the way down to his foot star, Rigel. And finally, the middle path of the Tree of Life corresponds again, starting to the crown, to the middle belt star, Alnilam, and down through Orion's sword stars, or phallus. Again, another mind-blowing discovery made with the help of this real oracle. And it's something that I've never seen written down about in any other researcher's work that I've looked into about this. And so this may be, again, something that has only been taught to mystery tradition initiates that we've discovered and are sharing with you. So let's take a look at a screenshot from Stellarium that's almost the mirror image or opposite from where we're looking at Orion 7 days before the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere at midnight, and flip that perspective to looking at where Orion is 8 days after the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere on what we commonly call the date of June 29th of 2020 at high noon this time. So we flipped to the opposite season, and we flipped to the opposite time of day. Orion, we find right in the middle of the cross of the north-south meridian line and the arc of the ecliptic, once again in the same alignment with his crown, or the constellation of Auriga, right above his head, and also crowning the all-seeing eye, or the real oracle. And also notice in this sky story picture, the sun is at its zenith, or the highest point that the sun reaches in the sky all day. But because it's summer solstice, and we're at that time of year when we're looking at this picture, it's also the highest place or the highest zenith in the sky that the sun will reach all year. So we've looked at 2 tarot cards in previous pieces as it relates to encoding this same sky story. And here we're going to look at another one. The number 1 card in the tarot deck, the Magician. Looking at the Magician in comparison with Orion in the sky story that we're looking at, it's obvious to see that the Magician card is encoding the constellation of Orion in this particular alignment. The tarot card is number 1. Its background, a bright yellow, symbolizing the sun or daytime. And this is where things start. The border of the flowers above the magician encodes Orion's position in the sky story at the top of the cross of the north-south meridian line in the ecliptic. The magician is holding a candle or a torch in his outstretched hand, just like Orion is holding the sun. In the magician's other arm, he is pointing down, symbolizing or encoding the more downward pointing direction of Orion's arm that holds his bow in the sky story. The table laid out before the magician on the tarot card has the pentacle, the sword, the wand, and the cup, representing the four elements of air, earth, fire, and water, as well as the four directions, north, south, east, and west. The infinity symbol above the magician's head could be encoding the crown of Auriga above Orion's head here, but it also could be encoding the entire path of the sun as it travels in the sky, as it reaches higher and lower zeniths and moves east to west. So if you photograph the sun from the same location at the same time all throughout the year, and then you merge all of those shots of the sun together in one image, a figure 8 or infinity symbol emerges, called an analemma, which is what I think the infinity symbol over the magician is really encoding. Now, as we end this piece, it should be pretty easy then to see what is actually being encoded in that very famous American icon, Lady Liberty herself, the Statue of Liberty. Her torch corresponds with, once again, Orion holding the sun in his hand at high noon, just 7 days before that famously celebrated American holy day or holiday known as Independence Day, which overall, obviously, Lady Liberty encodes. Her other arm pointed more downward, just like Orion's arm that holds his bow in the sky story picture. And the crown above Lady Liberty's head, encoding again the crown of the constellation of Auriga above Orion's head at the same time of year, the summer solstice, and what is known as Independence Day, that time of year. But specifically, Independence Day, which Lady Liberty goes with, well, that's the day, right? We're told that the new star of the world, what we commonly call America, was born. There is more than meets the eye, for all the reasons we think it is that this same Liar Liar Pants on Fire Secret Drama Society cult members that are aware of this knowledge and keep it wickedly hidden from the rest of us are called stars and are given the roles of the famous to perform on the world stage. We're going to continue to break through all of these stupefying spells that these superstars of this cult keep casting as we continue to share each of these mind-blowing discoveries. I know that more of us will find our own lamps more brightly lit and much easier in the darkness to find our way to the truth. Until next time, be well.